I've been asked to introduce Professor Alan Young, who is a law professor at Osgoode Hall University, where I spent second year. I never met Professor Young, but I was more than familiar with his work. Professor Young has recently been involved in a landmark decision involving sex work and the criminalization of sex work in Canadian law in Ontario. And it's a sister case to a case that is taking place on the West Coast, also involving very similar issues. And I'd first like to say that knowing the challenges that my colleagues on the West Coast have faced in building up trust and relationships with sex workers to bring forward such a case, it is clear evidence of Professor Young's credibility in the community and his ability to work with people that he was able to bring this case forward in partnership with some very brave sex workers that were willing to speak out about the conditions that they face. There are some reasons, some clear reasons why Professor Young, I believe, was trusted by his clients to bring forward their concerns. And a lot of it involves his history. He's been involved in free speech issues around challenging so-called drug literature that was prohibited by the criminal code. He was involved in the bondage bungalow dominatrix case. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that one. In 98 and 2000, very early days around medicinal marijuana, he was very involved in challenges, including Terry Parker's challenge of the prohibition on using marijuana as medicine. Mr. Parker had very serious epileptic seizures that were made better by his use of marijuana. And that successful challenge really rewrote the rules around using marijuana as medicine. And since then, he's worked with people who are positive, people who have MS, people who have cancer, and making sure that they can ease their nausea and their pain and that they're able to sleep if marijuana helps them to do that. Very brave litigation. His book perhaps says a lot about his sense of humor. The title is Justice Defiled: Perverts, Potheads, Serial Killers, and Lawyers. He is also clearly very respected by his students. In the wake of the Bedford decision, I was reading a Maclean's, don't hold it against me, I was reading Maclean's article about him, and there was a comment underneath. The article was called "The Luckiest Law Students in the World," and the comment said this: "You better believe we're the luckiest law students in the country. I'm very proud to be an Osgoode student, and I have Alan Young as my criminal law prof this afternoon. We're all looking forward to class. As a side note, he's an incredible professor. He's very gregarious and engaging. We're all very proud of his accomplishment this week." And I got to tell you, being a law prof, getting those kinds of kudos from a very difficult to please audience, perhaps the most difficult to please audience, is quite an accomplishment. To take things back a little bit to a serious note, and why we're raising the issue of sex work as the network, and why we asked Professor Young to be here. Sex workers, both male and female, face some of the most terrible conditions, the most serious human rights violations in Vancouver. As many as 49 women were killed by Robert Pickton, and the cries and concerns of sex workers about their missing sisters were not taken seriously. And short of actually being killed by clients and not being taken seriously by police, not being able to go to police for any number of reasons, sex workers are unable to, in many cases, in the work situations that they face because of the prohibitions in our criminal law, protect themselves to ensure that they're not exposed to HIV or other sexually transmitted diseases. If they are so exposed, they don't get to access workplace protections. And all of this despite the fact that they are required to pay taxes, that many of them pay license fees to cities, that they advertise very openly in many mainstream magazines. Their money is taken by almost every segment of society, and yet we do not return any protections to them as far as I can see. And so that is why this case is so important, and that is why I am so grateful that Professor Young is here to talk to us about his case, the Bedford case, and his clients, who in my mind are some real heroes, and why they brought this case forward. Please join me in welcoming Professor Young.
Anyways, thank you for inviting me here. I'm actually very pleased to be here. That's usually a very disingenuous comment everybody makes when they start to give a speech, you know, and this is the best concert I've given in my life. Toronto's the best place. The reason why I'm actually being genuine is because In the introduction, they used the word brave and courage, and it really wasn't about that. But when I started the case, before it was successful, I got a lot of criticism. I was showboating, that I was sort of playing on certain, topical issues for my own, celebrity status or something like that. And it was very hurtful because this was a difficult case for me to get some sort of unity amongst the constituency I was representing. And while I was preparing the case, I happened, during my research, to come across a report done by this organization, by Richard, and it was remarkable because it was more or less mirroring or echoing the arguments that I was making. And that gave me the courage and the tenacity to continue, because sometimes in the work I do, I'm sort of a soloist in the legal profession. Don't always get a lot of support from the legal profession. That's why I wrote the book that I did. And it was just really nice to see that somebody and some other organizations were thinking in similar terms as I was, and that's what allowed me to sort of argue this with confidence and with some degree of vigor. Okay, I'm still not sure why you asked me to come here, because quite frankly, I'm really constrained in what I can talk to you about. A lot of people want to talk about the future, what's going to happen if the sex trade is decriminalized, and I have no clue. I mean, I have some ideas, personal ideas, but I didn't bring this case with regime in mind. Constitutional lawyers, we are engaged in demolition. And the architects, no, but seriously, I mean, that's what makes the job easy, because the tough part is rebuilding. The architecture has to come from the sex trade itself, from the people who work within it. And I don't work in the sex trade. I would probably make very little money if I did. And so I don't think really I should set the rules and regime, but we do have quite a bit of experience now, because I didn't know this when I started the case. This also gave me courage. I didn't know all of Australia decriminalized, New Zealand, Germany, Holland. Everybody knows about Holland. I mean, you can do anything in Holland, but the reality is the world is changing, and I'm happy to be part of it, and I'm happy to speak to you about it, but I really don't know the future. I can't speak about the present, which is the appeal, which is happening on Monday, because it's very awkward, uncomfortable for me to talk about a case and appear as if I'm trying to influence the court outside of the court. So I can't really talk about my strategy. Plus the fact it's interesting, every speech I give, there is somebody from the Department of Justice sitting there making notes. And I got to tell you, I feel really good about that. Some people would call, you don't want to be paranoid. I like being paranoid. I like being watched. So that's working out for me. Anyways, so I can talk a little bit about the past, what happened and how we got to the result that we achieved. For those of you who have not read the judgment of Justice Himmel, which came out last year, I recommend you read it. It's a court case that is comprehensible and lucid and reflects exactly what we as applicants were trying to do. That rarely happens. Most of the time when I give a speech after one of my cases, I'm going, boy, the court really didn't get it. So you don't have to read the judgment. Let me tell you what the case is about. I don't have to tell you what the case is about. It's all there. But in a nutshell, if you know nothing about it, we were able to knock out the communication provision, living on the avails, and the body house provision on very similar arguments relating to the irrationality of what we do. The laws are overbroad, meaning they miss the mark, they overshoot the mark, and too many innocent people are caught up in it. The laws are arbitrary in the sense they work at cross purposes. One says get off the street, one says don't go inside. And the argument that I was most happy about, because it really reflects the tragedy of the situation, it's called gross disproportionality, where the law, the harms created by the laws grossly outweigh the benefits of the law, and that is the most accurate description of what we do with the sex trade. Very little benefit to society, enormous harm to communities and to the sex workers and to the clients.